Emma had always prided herself on being independent. Working as a waitress at Bella's Diner in a quiet town, she knew what it meant to hustle, to work for every penny. Her shifts were long, often stretching into the late hours of the night, and her tips were barely enough to cover her rent, let alone anything beyond the essentials. Every morning, as she walked to work, she passed by the same bench outside the diner, where an elderly homeless man named Victor sat. His face weathered and tired, a product of years spent on the streets. His deep-set eyes, despite the hardships etched across his features, always seemed to hold a quiet wisdom, reminding her of her late grandfather. Victor never asked for much. A cigarette and a cup of coffee were his usual companions. Emma, despite being stretched thin herself, couldn't help but notice his daily routine. Every morning, he'd shuffle in, hands shaking with cold, and sit on that bench, watching the world pass by. His story was one she had never heard, but Emma could see the years of pain in his posture and the distant sadness in his eyes. It broke her heart to see him like that, a forgotten soul in a town that had its fair share of blind spots. "Just ignore him, Emma," her colleagues would say whenever the subject of Victor came up. "He's been here for months, and he drives customers away." Some patrons even complained about his presence, but Emma couldn't bring herself to agree. Instead, every morning, she'd sneak him a cup of coffee when no one was looking. He always accepted with a grateful smile, his eyes softening with appreciation. "Thank you, dear," he'd say, his voice cracked but sincere. "You're one of the few kind ones left." Emma never questioned why she did it. Maybe it was because her grandfather always told her that helping others was more important than helping yourself. But even so, she couldn't shake the thought that maybe one day, something good would happen for Victor. Despite her own struggles, she couldn't let the man freeze on the streets, especially on Thanksgiving, when she knew she'd be sitting at home alone with only a small dinner to keep her company. That day, as she counted her tips at the end of her shift, she found herself staring at the $90 she had earned. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a small Thanksgiving meal. She could buy a turkey, some stuffing, maybe even a dessert. But as she looked out the window and saw Victor bundled up in his worn-out coat, shivering against the cold, something inside her snapped. "I can't just leave him out there," she thought, her heart swelling with empathy. Without hesitation, she gathered her tips and walked to the nearest grocery store. She didn't know how, but she knew she had to help. As she handed the cashier the money for a hot meal, one that Victor might not get to enjoy otherwise, she felt a strange peace settle in her heart. It wasn't much, just a humble turkey and some sides, but it was a meal that could change his day. The thought of him eating a warm dinner made her feel less alone. Less like she was struggling to make ends meet on her own. She had done something for someone else, something that mattered. That night, she approached Victor's bench with a tray of food in her hands. He was huddled under a thin blanket, trying to shield himself from the cold. When he saw her, his eyes lit up. "You didn't have to do this," he whispered, his voice full of surprise and gratitude. "I wanted to," Emma replied softly, kneeling beside him and wrapping the blanket tighter around his shoulders. As he took the meal from her, tears welled up in his eyes. The old man's hands shook as he held the plate, a silent testament to the pain he had endured. "God bless you," he said, his voice trembling. "I haven't had a meal like this in years." As she left him to enjoy his dinner, Emma felt a warmth inside her that had nothing to do with the cold November night. It was the warmth of knowing that she had made a difference, no matter how small it seemed. She returned to her small apartment that night, her stomach growling in hunger, but her heart full. She knew she had given up her own dinner, but the satisfaction of seeing Victor smile was more than worth it. The next day, Emma couldn't shake the thought of Victor. As she walked to work, the bench outside the diner was empty, the frost still clinging to the metal frame where he usually sat. A pang of worry hit her. Where could he be? She wondered, scanning the street for any sign of him. The weather had taken a sharp dip overnight, and the streets felt colder than ever. She hoped he hadn't wandered off somewhere, or worse, had been driven away. Her day started as usual, serving coffee, clearing plates, smiling at customers. But the absence of Victor gnawed at her. Every time she passed the window, her eyes would flicker to the empty bench, searching for him. I hope he's okay, she whispered to herself, her concern growing. Around noon, just as Emma was refilling a coffee cup for a regular customer, a well-dressed man walked in. He was tall, with neatly combed hair and a sharp suit that didn't belong in a diner. He sat down at the counter, ordered just a black coffee, and watched Emma closely. That's odd, Emma thought. Who orders just coffee and sits so quietly? For the next few days, the man returned, sitting in the same spot, ordering the same thing, just coffee. He didn't talk to anyone else, didn't smile, just sat there, scribbling notes in a small notebook. Emma couldn't help but wonder what he was writing. Was he someone who simply enjoyed solitude, or was there something more to this mysterious man? The staff didn't think much of it at first, but one day, during her break, Emma overheard her coworkers gossiping. One of them mentioned a story they had seen on the news about a wealthy businessman who had disappeared 3 months ago. His family had been searching for him ever since, but there had been no leads. Emma's curiosity piqued. Could this man be involved in the case? On the third day, the man finally spoke to Emma. As she brought him his coffee, he looked up and smiled, a gesture that felt strangely reassuring. "Would you sit with me for a moment?" he asked. "I'd like to talk." Nervously, Emma pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. The man introduced himself as John Bennett, a private investigator. "I've been watching your interactions with Victor," he said gently. "I'm trying to find him." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Victor? Is he okay?" John nodded slowly, his expression serious. He pulled out a photograph from his briefcase and placed it in front of her. Emma's breath caught as she looked down at the image. It was Victor, but younger, dressed in a business suit with a strong jawline and a confident smile. She recognized him instantly. "His name is Arthur Davis," John explained. "He's the former CEO of Davis Enterprises, one of the top tech companies in the country. He disappeared months ago after his wife passed away. He gave away most of his fortune to charity and left everything behind. His daughter, Lily, hired me to find him." Emma was speechless. She had no idea. The man she had been helping, the man who had seemed like a broken soul, was someone far different. Someone with wealth, power, and a family desperate to find him. John continued. "Arthur kept a silver chain around his neck to remind him of his late wife. The same chain you noticed when you gave him that Thanksgiving meal." Emma's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. The silver chain? The gesture of kindness? Could it be that her simple act had led to this revelation? She could hardly believe it. "Where is he now?" Emma asked, her voice filled with concern. John smiled softly. "He left early on Thanksgiving to go to his daughter's house. But before he left, he told me to find the waitress who showed him kindness when no one else would." The next morning, Emma arrived at Bella's diner, still reeling from the revelation of Victor's true identity. Her mind couldn't process the connection between the man she had helped and the wealthy CEO he once was. How had this former tech mogul, once at the top of the world, ended up on the streets, cold and alone? And more importantly, what did this mean for her? Was she just a small part of a bigger story? Or had she unknowingly sparked a chain of events that would change everything? As Emma entered the diner, she immediately noticed something was different. The usual morning rush seemed more frantic than usual. The kitchen was busier than she'd ever seen it, and her coworkers were whispering excitedly in the corner. She was about to ask what was going on when her manager, Jake, approached her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Emma?" Jake said, his voice a mix of awe and confusion. "There's someone here to see you." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Could it be John again? Had he come to tell her more about Victor? Or rather, Arthur? But when she stepped into the main dining area, the sight that greeted her nearly took her breath away. At the largest booth in the diner sat Victor, or rather Arthur, dressed in a sharp, clean suit. His hair, once graying and unkempt, was now neatly styled. The transformation was so striking that Emma could barely recognize him. Sitting next to him was a young woman, probably in her late 20s, with strikingly familiar eyes. Emma felt her heart thud in her chest. It was as if the room had gone silent, and she was suspended in time, unable to process the surreal sight in front of her. Before she could say anything, Arthur stood up with a smile that seemed both warm and deeply grateful. He extended his hand toward Emma, his voice steady and clear. "Hello, Emma. I'm Arthur, and this is my daughter, Lily," he said, motioning toward the young woman beside him. Emma's mind was still in a whirlwind, but she reached out to shake his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. Lily stood up and embraced Emma, her eyes filled with emotion. "Thank you for everything you did for my father," she said, her voice thick with gratitude. "Your kindness brought him back to us. We've been searching for him for months, and we never expected something like this." Emma looked at both of them in disbelief. She had known Arthur, for months, but she had never imagined that her small act of kindness had somehow rekindled something in him that had been lost for so long. She had never considered that this elderly man, whom she had shared so many quiet moments with, was the same person who had once led a multi-million-dollar tech empire. "I don't understand," Emma whispered, still struggling to grasp the enormity of the situation. "How is this possible? How did you end up here, like this?" Arthur smiled softly, his eyes shadowed by past pain. "It's a long story, Emma. My wife passed away, and I couldn't bear the thought of continuing without her. I lost myself in the grief. I gave away most of my wealth to charity, hoping it would ease the pain, but I couldn't find peace. I became a shadow of myself, wandering from place to place, trying to escape the emptiness." His voice cracked slightly as he spoke, and Lily placed a hand on his arm in support. Emma felt a lump form in her throat as she listened. She could sense the raw emotion in Arthur's words, the depth of his suffering. To think that the man she had helped, the man who had seemed so far removed from her world, was carrying such heavy baggage broke her heart in ways she couldn't explain. "But then I met you, Emma," Arthur continued. "You treated me with dignity and compassion when I had nothing left. You gave me a meal on Thanksgiving when I thought I would go hungry. That small act of kindness woke me up from the dark place I had been hiding in for so long. It reminded me of my wife's favorite saying, 'A warm meal can heal a broken soul.' You reminded me of that, and I knew I needed to find my way back to my family." Emma felt a wave of warmth rush over her, mixed with a tinge of sadness. She had never known how deep Arthur's pain ran, how desperate he had been. The man she had seen as just a homeless soul had been a man battling his own demons, and she had unknowingly played a pivotal role in his healing. Lily, wiping her eyes, looked at Emma with admiration. "You gave him hope when he had none left. I don't know how to thank you for that." Before Emma could respond, Arthur's voice grew more resolute. "I want to do something to honor your kindness, Emma. I've been thinking about this for a while now, and I'm going to make it happen." Emma looked at him in confusion. What could he possibly want to do? She was just a waitress, a struggling young woman with dreams of something more, but Arthur's next words took her by complete surprise. "I've decided to buy this diner," he said, his voice steady, "and I want you to be the manager. I'll make sure you have full ownership." Emma's eyes widened in shock. This couldn't be real. A diner, her diner, bought by a billionaire, and she was going to be in charge? "Wait, what?" she stammered, her mind spinning. "You're serious?" Arthur nodded, his expression sincere. "Yes, I want to give back. I want this diner to become something more than just a place to eat. I want it to be a sanctuary for people like you and me, those who have nothing, those who feel forgotten. This diner will be a place where anyone, no matter their circumstances, can get a warm meal." Emma stood there, speechless, as a wave of emotions crashed over her. Her whole life had just been turned upside down. How was this possible? She had just given a meal to a homeless man, and now she was standing here, on the verge of something she never could have imagined. This wasn't just a story of kindness, it was a transformation, a moment that would define the rest of her life. Before Emma could process all of this, a few more people entered the diner, the noise of the bustling kitchen growing louder. A group of news reporters stepped in, cameras flashing, eager to capture the incredible story unfolding. Emma's heart raced as the reality of the situation began to sink in. This was more than just a diner. It was a symbol of hope, of redemption, and of the power of compassion. And then, just as the reporters began asking questions, Arthur pulled out an envelope and handed it to Emma. "This is for you," he said softly. Inside the envelope was a check for $5 million, the seed money to start the Emma Wilson Foundation for Homeless Care, a foundation dedicated to helping those who had fallen through the cracks of society. Emma couldn't believe it. She had never asked for anything in return. And yet here she was, holding the key to a future she had never dared to dream about. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, decisions, and an overwhelming sense of change. Emma had barely slept, her mind racing with the enormity of what was happening. The diner, once just a place where she worked to make ends meet, was now the epicenter of something much larger. As news of the diner's transformation spread, it became more than just a local story. It was a symbol of hope, of the ripple effect that one act of kindness could create. The next morning, as Emma walked into the diner, the weight of the responsibility hit her again. The place was buzzing with excitement. Customers, some regulars, others new faces, all gathered to witness the extraordinary turn of events. The walls of the diner had already started to transform, with new signs proclaiming, "Everyone deserves a warm meal, and hope starts here." The mood was electric, and Emma's nerves were frayed as she prepared for the next chapter of her life. Arthur, Victor, had been true to his word. Not only had he purchased the diner, but he had also begun renovations, transforming it into a much larger space with a kitchen capable of serving hundreds instead of dozens. The atmosphere had changed as well. There was a sense of camaraderie, of community that filled the air. It was as if the diner had come alive with purpose, a purpose that transcended just serving food. "Hey, Emma," one of the waitresses, Lucy, called out as she approached her. "You've got a lot of people asking about the new sign. They're excited to see what's coming next." Emma smiled at Lucy, trying to maintain some semblance of calm. "It's all a little overwhelming, isn't it?" "Yeah," Lucy agreed, "but I think we're going to change lives here. I really believe that." Lucy's words brought Emma back to the present. They were going to change lives, but the real question was, how would they sustain this? Could a diner, a single act of kindness, really make a lasting impact? Could they truly be a safe haven for people who had nowhere else to go? Emma didn't have all the answers, but she knew that if they were going to make this work, she had to lead with everything she had. As the diner filled up, Emma saw familiar faces, but now each of them seemed to have a renewed sense of purpose. Regulars who had once complained about the noise or the long waits were now welcoming the changes, cheering on the idea that this place could be more than just a restaurant. One by one, they came to Emma, offering support, offering donations, or simply thanking her for what was happening. Amidst all the buzz, the door opened with a soft jingle. Emma turned to see an elderly woman, frail but determined, step into the diner. She was holding a small bag, and her face was lined with age and hardship. Emma immediately recognized her as one of the regulars from the homeless shelters in the area. Without hesitation, Emma walked over to her. "Hi, Mrs. Jenkins. How are you today?" Emma asked, her voice filled with warmth. Mrs. Jenkins looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to thank you, Emma, for everything. My son, he's finally got a job, a real job. He's staying off the streets. It's all because of you." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm so happy for you," she whispered, unsure of what else to say. Mrs. Jenkins handed Emma a small envelope. "Please, take this," she said, her voice trembling. "This is all I have, but I want you to have it to help more people like my son." Emma opened the envelope slowly, and inside she found $500 in cash. "I can't take this," Emma said, her voice choked with emotion. "You don't have to give me anything." But Mrs. Jenkins shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You've given us more than anyone ever could. You gave him hope. I never thought I'd see the day when he was off the streets. And it's all because of your kindness." The tears in Emma's eyes matched Mrs. Jenkins as she took the money, though she wasn't sure what to do with it yet. One thing was certain. This diner was becoming something more than just a business. It was a place of healing, a place where people who had nothing could walk through the doors and find not just a meal, but dignity, respect, and a chance to start over. Over the next few days, the changes continued. The kitchen staff, which had been small and modest, grew. More volunteers arrived, eager to help cook, serve, and support the growing number of people who came to the diner each day. Emma had quickly realized that this wasn't just about serving food. It was about creating a culture, a community, where everyone was seen and valued. People who had once felt invisible were now greeted with smiles, offered a hot meal, and invited to stay as long as they needed. But the real change came when Arthur, with the help of Michael, began making plans to expand. Emma was still processing everything that had happened, but now there was a clear direction. Arthur and Lily, both passionate about the diner's new mission, had decided to open multiple locations, reaching even more people who needed a place to turn to. Emma couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility. As the diner grew, so did her role. She had gone from being a waitress to being the heart of this new movement. Arthur had made it clear that this wasn't just about charity. It was about empowerment. It was about providing a platform for people to rebuild their lives, to stand tall, and to feel valued again. One afternoon, as she sat in the office, going over the plans for the new locations, Lily walked in with a stack of blueprints. "We've got everything lined up," Lily said, smiling. "The first new location is opening in 3 months, and there are 2 more after that. We want you to oversee all of them, Emma. You've earned it." Emma felt her breath catch in her throat. I can't believe this," she said, shaking her head. "I was just trying to do something small, something kind." Lily nodded, her expression serious. "That's the beauty of it. You never know how far kindness will go, and now, because of you, we're changing the lives of hundreds of people." Emma stood up, looking at the blueprints. She thought about all the faces she had seen, people who had come through the doors of Bella's diner with nothing but hope in their eyes. And now they would have even more opportunities, more places to go for help. She had started with one small meal for a homeless man, but now she was helping to create a network that would help so many others. Emma knew that this was only the beginning. She had no idea where this journey would lead. But one thing was certain: she was no longer just a waitress. She was part of something much bigger, and for the first time in her life, she truly believed that the world could change, one act of kindness at a time. The days at Bella's Diner were no longer just about serving meals. They were about serving hope. The energy in the diner had shifted in a way Emma had never expected. Each person who entered seemed to carry a piece of the puzzle that was slowly coming together. The diner, once just a humble business in a quiet corner of the city, had become a beacon of compassion, a place where people could rebuild their lives, one meal at a time. Emma spent her mornings managing the growing operations, overseeing the kitchen, the volunteers, and the new hires. The diner had become a community gathering spot, more than just a place to eat, but a place to connect, to heal. News of the transformation continued to spread, and people from all walks of life came to visit, to contribute, and sometimes just to be a part of something larger than themselves. But it was the faces of the people who came in for a meal that truly moved Emma. They came with stories of struggle, loss, and survival, stories of perseverance and hope. And with each story shared, Emma understood that the diner was becoming a sanctuary, not just for the homeless, but for anyone who had ever felt alone or forgotten. One morning, as Emma was preparing for the lunch rush, a man approached her. He was younger than most of the patrons who frequented the diner, his clothes worn but not as ragged as some. His eyes were filled with a quiet sadness, and he hesitated before speaking. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Are you Emma?" Emma looked up and smiled warmly. "Yes, I'm Emma. How can I help you?" I'm not here for food," the man said, his voice trembling. "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Thank you for what?" "For giving people like me a chance," he said, his eyes filling with emotion. "I've been homeless for a while. I was lost, didn't know where to turn. But then I came in here. I got a hot meal. I started coming back every day. And slowly, I found the courage to apply for a job. Just a part-time job, but it's something. I'm starting to turn my life around." Emma blinked, overcome with emotion. She reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's amazing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so proud of you." The man smiled, but there was a sadness in his eyes that wouldn't go away. "I just wanted to let you know. Your kindness saved me. You may not know it, but it changed everything for me." Emma's heart swelled with pride, but she also felt a pang of guilt. She knew that this diner had become something extraordinary, but there was still so much work to be done. The number of people in need seemed endless, and despite the success of the diner's mission, Emma couldn't help but feel that they were just scratching the surface. Later that day, Arthur and Lily arrived, both with wide smiles on their faces. "Emma, Arthur said, walking up to her. "We've got some exciting news." Emma raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" Lily handed her a stack of papers. "We've been approved for the first of the new locations. Construction starts next week, and we've secured funding for 2 more. This is just the beginning." Emma's mind raced. The impact of their work was expanding at an incredible pace, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders. It was no longer just about Bella's Diner. It was about creating a network of safe spaces for those who had nowhere to turn. A place where kindness and compassion could be paid forward, where no one would be turned away. "But what about the people who are still out there?" Emma asked, her voice quiet but firm. "The ones who don't have anywhere to go, who don't even know this place exists?" Arthur smiled, his expression proud. "That's why we're opening more locations, and we're going to make sure that we don't just serve food. We're going to offer support, resources, guidance. We're going to partner with organizations to help people get back on their feet." Lily nodded. "We've got big plans, Emma. You're going to lead them. You've done something incredible here, and now we need you to bring that vision to life." Emma took a deep breath, her heart racing. She had always dreamed of making a difference, but this was bigger than anything she could have imagined. She was at the center of it, leading a movement that was already changing lives, and now it was expanding, growing, reaching more people than ever before. As they continued to discuss the plans for the new locations, Emma found herself lost in thought. She thought about the man who had thanked her earlier, the one who had found a new sense of purpose after coming to the diner. She thought about the hundreds of people who had walked through these doors, each of them carrying their own burdens, their own stories of hardship. It wasn't just about food. It wasn't just about charity. It was about giving people the opportunity to rebuild their lives, to feel human again, to be seen and valued for who they were, not just what they had or hadn't done. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Emma threw herself into the expansion process, overseeing the renovations of the new locations, hiring staff, and working closely with local organizations to ensure that each diner would offer more than just a meal. They were creating a network of resources, job training programs, mental health support, addiction recovery services. They were giving people the tools they needed to change their lives. As the new diner locations began to open, Emma could hardly keep up with the growing demand. It wasn't just the homeless who came. They were joined by people who had fallen on hard times, who were struggling to make ends meet, who had lost hope. But the story was always the same. They came for food, but they stayed for the warmth, for the compassion, for the second chance. And then, one day, a familiar face walked through the door. It was the elderly woman, Mrs. Jenkins. She looked older, more frail than before, but there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there the first time Emma had met her. "I've been meaning to come and see you," Mrs. Jenkins said, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "I heard about the new locations. I just wanted to thank you. You helped save my son's life. And now he's got his own place. He's got a job. And I know it's all because of you." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. She took Mrs. Jenkins' hand, squeezing it gently. "You're the reason we do this." Mrs. Jenkins smiled, tears in her eyes. "Well, you taught me that. Kindness doesn't end, Emma. It keeps growing, just like this diner. You've made a real difference." As Emma looked around the bustling diner, filled with new faces and old ones, she couldn't help but feel a profound sense of pride. What started as a single act of kindness, a warm meal for a homeless man on Thanksgiving, had transformed into something so much larger than she could have ever imagined. The ripple effect had only just begun. The months that followed saw Bella's Diner grow beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Emma had quickly transitioned from the overwhelmed manager of a single diner to the leader of a small network of restaurants aimed at helping the homeless and those struggling to make ends meet. With each new location that opened, Emma could feel the weight of her responsibility deepening, but so did the sense of purpose that now defined her every waking moment. The idea that a single act of kindness, one simple, selfless decision to help a stranger, could create such a profound ripple effect was still something Emma found hard to wrap her head around. She had gone from being an ordinary woman trying to make ends meet to someone whose every move was shaping the lives of hundreds. And yet, despite the growth, despite the media attention, the one thing that kept her grounded was still the people who walked through the diner doors every day. The people she'd come to know so well, each carrying their own burdens, each giving her a new reason to continue the work. One chilly morning, Emma stood in front of the new location in the heart of downtown, watching the workers put the final touches on the place. The diner was already buzzing with activity inside, the scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon drifting through the air. She couldn't help but feel a pang of pride. This diner, like all the others, was about so much more than food. It was about opportunity, about second chances, and about offering a place where people could rediscover their humanity. "Hey, Emma, you busy?" Arthur's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He had been instrumental in helping to expand the diner's mission, and his energy was always infectious. "Not too busy, just taking it all in," Emma said, smiling as she turned to face him. Arthur grinned. "Well, take it all in while you can. We've got a full house today, and I think the press is coming by too. They're catching on to what we're doing here." Emma felt a jolt of nervousness. While she had embraced the media attention, she always struggled with the spotlight. She'd never set out to change the world in such a grand way. She had only wanted to help one man who was cold and hungry. Yet here she was, at the helm of something much bigger than herself, something that could potentially touch thousands, even millions of lives. "You've done amazing things here, Emma," Arthur said, his tone more serious now. "Don't forget that. You've given people hope, and you've given them a future." Before Emma could respond, the sound of the diner's door opening cut through the conversation. A familiar face stepped inside. It was the young man, the one who had first thanked Emma for giving him a second chance. He looked different now, clean-shaven with a job uniform on and a glint of pride in his eyes. He waved enthusiastically as he spotted Emma. "Emma," he called, rushing over to where she stood. "Hey," Emma greeted him warmly. "How's the new job going?" "It's going great, thanks to you," he replied, his voice full of gratitude. "I've been working as a server at a local restaurant, and I actually just got promoted to a kitchen assistant. I'm telling you, I never thought I'd be here. Never thought I'd have this kind of chance." Emma beamed. "That's incredible. I'm so proud of you." "I owe it all to you," the young man continued. "Without this place, I'd probably still be out there, lost. I've been thinking a lot about what you've done for me. And it's not just me. There are so many others who've turned their lives around because of this diner. You've created something that changes lives, Emma." Tears stung Emma's eyes. She reached out to place a hand on his arm, her heart swelling with emotion. "You did the work. You're the one who made the change. I just gave you a place to start." He shook his head, a genuine smile on his face. "No, you gave us more than that. You gave us a home." As he left the diner, Emma stood for a moment, feeling the weight of his words settle deep in her heart. A home. That's what they had all created together, a place where people weren't just fed, but where they were valued, where they could belong. And in that moment, Emma realized just how far this journey had taken her, and how much further it could go. Later that afternoon, as she made her rounds through the diner, Emma saw more familiar faces. A woman with a young child, her eyes filled with hope as she handed a volunteer a bag of groceries to donate. A former regular customer who had once complained about the homeless outside the diner, now sitting at the counter with a warm meal in front of him and a new understanding in his eyes. It was becoming clear that this place, this mission, was not just changing the lives of those in need. It was changing the entire community. But the most incredible part of all was how quickly the concept had spread. Emma and her team had begun receiving requests from other cities, from other organizations, wanting to replicate their model. They were being asked to teach others how to create similar spaces for people to rebuild their lives. And the idea that had started with one simple meal for a homeless man was now an international movement. As the diner's success spread, Emma found herself sitting across from some of the most influential people in the city. There were business leaders, government officials, and philanthropists, people who had long operated in high-powered circles, but now saw the power of what Emma and her team had accomplished. What you've done here is extraordinary, one of them said, his voice full of admiration. We've seen organizations try to tackle homelessness for years, but what you've done is different. You've created a community, not just a charity. You've given people the dignity and support they need to change their lives. Emma felt her throat tighten as she absorbed the praise. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, and yet she knew it wasn't about her. It was about the people they were helping. "We're just getting started," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "There's still so much work to do. We want to do more, serve more people, offer more resources." One of the philanthropists leaned forward. "What if we could help? What if we could give you the funding you need to expand this mission?" Emma's eyes widened. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The chance to truly grow the network, to provide resources for people who had nowhere else to turn. "I'd love to talk more," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "There's so much potential here, but it's about making sure we don't lose the heart of what we've built. It's about the people, not the profits." The meeting continued long into the afternoon, and by the time Emma left the building, her mind was buzzing with ideas and possibilities. With the support of those who believed in her vision, she could take Bella's Diner and the mission it represented to new heights. Back at the diner, life continued as usual. The staff were working hard, the customers were smiling, and the regulars were chatting with the volunteers. It was a place of warmth and community, a place where people were cared for, not just fed. And Emma, for the first time in months, allowed herself to breathe deeply, to take in the weight of everything they had accomplished. But she knew the journey wasn't over yet. In many ways, it had only just begun. As the days went by, Emma's world began to shift in ways she never could have predicted. The once humble diner that had served as the starting point of an extraordinary journey was now at the center of something much larger, an expansive movement that was taking root across the city and beyond. Every new donation, every new volunteer, every new person who walked through the doors seeking help only reinforced the profound impact one small act of kindness could have. Despite all the changes, Emma remained grounded. She continued to manage the diner and work alongside the people who had become her family, the team that had made all of this possible. And as the organization grew, Emma began to learn that leadership didn't always mean having all the answers. It meant listening, supporting, and staying true to the core of what they were trying to achieve. One afternoon, as she walked through the now bustling Bella's Diner, Emma noticed a familiar face sitting by the window. It was the woman with the young child, the same woman who had once shared her story of living on the streets with nothing but hope. The woman had brought her son into the diner for the first time months ago, desperate for a warm meal and a fresh start. Emma had been the one to serve her that day. And now, months later, she saw the same woman sitting at the table. But this time, there was no fear in her eyes. There was no shame or desperation, only hope and pride. "Hey, Sarah," Emma said, her voice warm with recognition. The woman looked up, a smile lighting up her face. "Hey, Emma, it's been a while, huh? My son and I have been doing well. He's got a job now, and we finally have a place of our own. It's still hard, but it's different now." Emma sat down across from her. "I'm so happy to hear that. How's everything going for you?" Sarah's eyes glistened as she spoke. "It's been amazing. My son's got his first paycheck, and we even got a secondhand car. It's funny, I never thought we'd get here. You know, when we first came in, I didn't think we'd make it. But this place, it's been like a lifeline. You gave me and my son the chance to have a future. You gave us more than just food. You gave us hope." Emma felt her heart swell. There was something undeniably powerful about seeing the transformation in someone else's life. Especially when she knew she had played a small part in it. The diner had become so much more than just a place to eat. It had become a place of rebirth, of second chances. "I just wanted to thank you, Emma," Sarah continued, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "It was this place, your kindness, that gave me the strength to keep going. I thought I was invisible, but you saw me. You helped me. You gave me a seat at the table." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. She couldn't hold them back. "Thank you, Sarah. You've done the hard work. You've made a life for yourself and your son. I'm just glad we could help." Sarah nodded, a proud smile on her face. And now, I'm doing the same. I'm volunteering here every week. I want to help someone else like you helped me. The warmth in Emma's chest deepened. This was exactly what she had hoped for. A ripple effect that carried on far beyond the walls of the diner. It wasn't just about offering a meal. It was about empowering people to take control of their lives, to lift others up, and to create their own futures. Sarah had become an example of that, and Emma couldn't have been prouder. As Sarah left, promising to return the next week with more supplies for the kitchen, Emma looked around the diner, observing the people gathered around the tables, the conversations happening between strangers who had become friends, the laughter and camaraderie that now filled the air. This place had grown into something extraordinary, and it was only the beginning. That night, after the last of the customers had left and the kitchen staff was cleaning up, Emma sat down at one of the booths to catch her breath. She ran her fingers over the silver bracelet James had given her. The engraved words had become her mantra. Kindness given freely returns tenfold. It was a reminder that this wasn't just about charity. It was about a fundamental belief in the good in people. She had seen it, again and again, in the faces of those who walked through the diner doors. They didn't come here to beg for handouts. They came here to reclaim their dignity, their worth, and their place in the world. And Emma had given them the space to do that. As the weeks went by, more stories like Sarah's filled the diner. People who had been on the streets for years, people who had been given up on, began to turn their lives around. It wasn't always easy, and it didn't happen overnight, it sounds. But Emma had come to realize that every small victory, every person who found their footing, every family who was reunited, every dream that was rekindled, was a part of the larger mission they had started together. One particularly busy afternoon, as Emma was running the front of the diner, a new face caught her attention. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, walked in hesitantly. She looked out of place, clearly nervous. She hesitated at the door, looking around at the bustling diner, unsure of where to go. Emma approached her, smiling gently. "Can I help you?" The woman looked up, her eyes wide with uncertainty. I heard about this place. My name's Grace. I don't have anywhere else to go. I've been staying with a friend, but things are getting bad there. I just need a meal. I don't have any money, but I'll work if you need help." Emma's heart went out to her. She could see the same desperation that she had seen in so many others, the same look she had seen in her own reflection not too long ago. "Grace," she said warmly, "you don't need to work for a meal here. You're welcome to sit down and have something to eat. We've got plenty, and we'd be happy to have you." Grace's face relaxed for the first time since she walked in. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Emma smiled and led her to an empty seat, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what it was all about. A simple meal, a warm place to stay, a chance to start over. She couldn't promise Grace an easy journey, but she could promise her a place where she could try. As Grace settled into her seat, Emma turned to the kitchen, her mind already racing with ideas. There was still so much to do, so many people to reach, so many lives to change. And with every person who walked through the door, Emma knew they were building something that could last. A legacy, a place that would continue to give. A place where kindness wasn't just an act, it was the foundation of everything they did. The story wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. As the weeks passed, the diner's impact continued to ripple outwards in ways that neither Emma nor Sarah could have ever anticipated. The transformation that had begun with a simple act of kindness had snowballed into a movement, one that not only reshaped lives, but redefined the very concept of community. One evening, as Emma walked into the diner, she was greeted by the usual flurry of activity. The kitchen staff was bustling with energy, preparing for the dinner rush, and the tables were filled with customers who had quickly become regulars. However, today felt different. There was a palpable sense of anticipation in the air. A well-dressed couple sat near the corner booth, their eyes scanning the menu. As Emma approached, she noticed their subtle glances towards the framed picture on the wall, a photo of Sarah, taken on the night when the diner had first opened under its new purpose. The story of the diner had gone viral, reaching far beyond the local community, and the news had traveled fast. People from all walks of life, from local business owners to everyday citizens, were drawn to the diner, eager to be a part of its mission. "Hi there, what can I get you today?" Emma asked with a friendly smile, though her mind couldn't help but wander towards the growing buzz outside. She had been hearing whispers of a new partnership, but she wasn't sure what it meant for the diner. The woman in the couple smiled warmly, and before she could respond, the man spoke up. "Actually, I think we might be interested in something a little more unconventional." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Unconventional? I'm intrigued." The man chuckled softly. "We're here because we've been following the story of this diner, the transformation it's gone through, the lives it's touched. We're interested in getting involved, and we think we can offer something that could take this place to the next level." Emma's heart skipped a beat. The transformation was already so monumental. What could they possibly mean? The woman reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek brochure. "We're investors," she said. "My husband and I run a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping community-based initiatives like this one. We believe in what you're doing here, and we want to help take it nationwide. We want to help expand this mission, starting with this diner." Emma blinked in disbelief, her thoughts racing. Could this really be happening? Was this diner truly on the verge of becoming something bigger? "Are you serious?" she asked, almost too stunned to speak. The woman nodded. "Absolutely. We've seen the way people's lives are being changed here, and we want to help you reach even more people. Create more locations, offer more meals, provide more support. The work you're doing is extraordinary, and we believe it has the potential to make an even bigger impact." Emma could hardly process the magnitude of the offer. A nationwide expansion? It felt surreal. But at the same time, it felt right. This diner, this place of second chances, had already become a lifeline for so many people, and now it had the opportunity to become even more. Over the next few days, the idea of expanding the diner into multiple locations became a tangible reality. Meetings were scheduled, plans were drafted, and discussions on the logistics of turning the small local diner into a nationwide network of community-centered restaurants began in earnest. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was about creating a safe haven for anyone who needed it, regardless of their background, their past, or their financial status. The diner's mission had always been about compassion, but now, with the help of the nonprofit investors, it was about growing that compassion exponentially, reaching more people and offering more support. Meanwhile, Sarah, who had returned to work at the diner as part of the team, could barely believe what was unfolding. She had watched this place grow from a small, struggling diner into a beacon of hope for the homeless and marginalized. And now, with the potential for multiple locations, Sarah could hardly imagine the difference they could make. Every day, she met with volunteers who had come from all over the city to help. Some came to serve meals, others to offer counseling or job assistance. But all of them had one thing in common: the belief that they were part of something bigger than themselves. Sarah often reflected on the countless lives that had been touched through this simple space. It was as if the diner had become a metaphor for transformation itself. A place where people came broken and left healed, where those who had been ignored and forgotten could find community and purpose. One afternoon, as Sarah was clearing plates from a table, a young man caught her eye. His clothes were worn, his face weary, and his eyes carried the weight of a hard life. Yet, as he walked in, there was something different about him. He didn't look defeated. He looked determined, almost hopeful. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked, offering him a seat. The man hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't have much money. I've been living on the streets for the last year, but I heard about this place. I just wanted to see if maybe I could get something to eat. I'm willing to work for it." Sarah smiled gently and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to work for your meal here. Everyone's welcome. Please, sit down. You're not alone." The man's eyes welled up with tears, a mixture of relief and gratitude. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a burden or an outsider. He felt seen. As Sarah walked back to the kitchen to alert the staff about the new guest, she couldn't help but reflect on the countless stories like his that had unfolded in this diner. It had become a place where no one had to explain their past, where no one had to hide their pain. It was a place of healing, where kindness was the currency, and a warm meal was worth more than any price tag. Later that day, Emma returned to the diner to finalize plans with the investors. As she stepped into the bustling kitchen, she was greeted by the familiar hum of activity and the sound of laughter. She had come a long way since that first Thanksgiving, when everything had felt uncertain and her future unclear. But now, with each passing day, it became more and more apparent that the diner was no longer just a business. It was a movement, a force for good that had only just begun. "Everything's moving along," Emma said to Sarah, who was arranging the tables. "It's all coming together, isn't it?" Sarah nodded, her eyes sparkling with the promise of what was to come. "It really is. I never could have imagined something like this, but here we are, and there's so much more we can do." "I'm glad we're doing it together," Emma said, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the woman standing beside her. With the plans for expansion in place and new partnerships forming, the diner's influence only continued to grow. Emma's heart swelled with pride as she watched more and more people walk through those doors, each one with a story, each one deserving of a chance. As she reflected on all they had accomplished, she knew one thing for certain: kindness, given freely, could truly change the world, and they were just getting started. It wasn't long before the diner became a sanctuary in the community, and its influence began to spread far beyond the city. What had once been a modest establishment, offering warmth and nourishment to those who had nowhere else to turn, was now a model for how small acts of kindness could spark lasting change. Sarah, who had always been a quiet observer, now found herself at the heart of a growing movement. Her days were filled with planning, coordinating with volunteers, and overseeing the expansion. She worked tirelessly alongside Emma, who had taken on the role of overseeing the new partnerships and marketing, spreading the word about their mission to help others. Together, they were building something bigger than themselves. One afternoon, as Sarah stood in the kitchen, watching the staff prepare for another busy shift, she noticed something different. A woman, whom she had never seen before, walked into the diner. She was older, perhaps in her 60s, and there was a sadness in her eyes that mirrored the struggles Sarah herself had faced not too long ago. The woman hesitated at the door, as if unsure whether to enter. Sarah instinctively smiled and approached her. "Can I help you?" she asked warmly. The woman looked up, surprised by the kindness in Sarah's voice. I heard about this place," she said softly. "I don't have much money. My son, he lived on the streets for years. Right? Someone showed him kindness here. Now he has a job, a home. I just wanted to thank you." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as the woman spoke. This was the ripple effect, the lives that had been changed, not just by the diner, but by the kindness it had fostered. "Thank you for sharing that with me," Sarah said, touched by the woman's words. "Would you like to sit down and have a meal? It's on the house." The woman nodded, sitting down at one of the tables, overwhelmed with emotion. Sarah placed a hot meal in front of her and watched as she took a bite, her eyes softening with each taste. As Sarah returned to the kitchen, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was the reason she had started this journey, the hope that small acts of kindness could restore not just one life, but many. Meanwhile, Emma was in the back office, finalizing the paperwork for their upcoming locations. There was so much to do, and at times it felt overwhelming. But Emma had learned from Sarah's example that no task was too big when approached with a heart full of purpose. "Sarah, I just got off the phone with the investors," Emma said, walking into the kitchen with a grin on her face. "We're moving forward with 2 more locations in the next 3 months. It's really happening." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The dream of helping more people, of expanding the diner's mission to reach more cities, was becoming a reality. "That's incredible," she said, her voice filled with awe. "I still can't believe how far we've come." Emma smiled, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "It's all because of you. You started this. You showed the world that kindness has the power to change everything." For Sarah, the praise was humbling. She didn't want the attention or recognition. All she wanted was to continue doing what she had always done, helping others. But Emma was right. Sarah's simple act of kindness had ignited something far bigger than either of them could have imagined. Across the street, a large banner was being hung, proclaiming the diner's new slogan: "Everyone deserves a warm meal." It was a sign of how far they had come and a reminder of how much more there was to do. The diner had become a gathering place not only for those in need, but for the community at large. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a symbol of hope, a place where anyone, no matter their circumstances, could feel seen and valued. The patrons were no longer just customers. They were part of a greater family, bound by a shared belief in kindness and compassion. The staff had grown too. More people had come forward to volunteer, and the diner was expanding its reach with every passing day. Sarah had never imagined she'd be the leader of such a movement, but she embraced the responsibility, knowing that she wasn't alone. She had Emma, the investors, the volunteers, and the entire community standing behind her. But despite all the success and recognition, the heart of the diner remained unchanged. It was still a place where Sarah greeted every guest with a smile, where no one was turned away, where every person, regardless of their past or present, was treated with dignity and respect. One day, a familiar face walked in through the door. It was James, the man Sarah had first helped with her Thanksgiving dinner. He had been a symbol of everything the diner had come to represent, and now he was a regular presence, offering support and guidance to others who had once been where he had. "Sarah," James said, his voice warm as ever. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened since that first meal. The diner, the foundation, the new locations. It's all amazing, but we can't stop here. There are still so many people out there who need help." Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "I know, and we won't stop. We're just getting started." James smiled, his eyes glistening with the same hope that had once been kindled in him. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. You've created something that's going to change the world." That night, after the diner had closed, Sarah sat alone at one of the tables, reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. She had come a long way from the waitress who had counted every tip and worried about her next meal. Now, she was part of something much bigger, something that would continue to touch lives for years to come. She took a deep breath and smiled, knowing that her journey wasn't over yet. There were still countless people to help, and as long as she had breath in her body, she would continue to give what she could, just as she had all those months ago. Because Sarah knew now, more than ever, that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could create a ripple that reached farther than anyone could imagine. And she was ready to continue spreading that ripple, one meal, one person, one act of kindness at a time. Months passed, and the Sarah Wilson Foundation continued to grow, with new locations opening across the country. Each new diner was a testament to the power of compassion and the lives that had been forever changed. Sarah's story, once shared by a few, was now told by millions. Local and national news outlets covered the expansion, often featuring her as a symbol of selflessness and hope. But Sarah remained humble, always deflecting the praise back to the community, the volunteers, and everyone who had been a part of the journey. The diner was no longer just a business. It had become a lifeline for so many. Every day, new faces walked through the door, each carrying their own burdens, each hoping for a chance to rebuild their lives. And Sarah, as always, greeted them with a warm smile and a promise that they were welcome. One morning, as Sarah walked into the diner, Emma greeted her with news that would change everything. "Sarah, you've been nominated for the National Humanitarian Award," she said, holding up a letter. Sarah was speechless. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Emma said with a grin. "Your actions speak for themselves." As Sarah looked around at the bustling diner, filled with people whose lives had been touched by kindness, she realized that the award wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had contributed to the movement. Every volunteer, every donor, every person who had walked through the door and made this dream a reality. And so, as Sarah stood on stage to accept the award, she spoke to the crowd about the simple truth that had guided her all along. Kindness, given freely, returns tenfold. This is just the beginning. The crowd erupted into applause, and as Sarah looked out over the audience, she couldn't help but feel that her journey was only beginning. She had started with a single meal, a single act of kindness, and now she was part of something that would continue to transform lives for years to come. The diner had become more than just a place to eat. It had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that no matter where we come from, we all deserve a chance to start again. And that, Sarah knew, was the legacy she wanted to leave behind. As Sarah stood before the crowd, holding the award, she couldn't help but think back to that cold Thanksgiving night when she had made a simple choice to help a stranger. It was a decision made from the heart, with no expectation of reward or recognition, but rather a quiet belief that kindness could make a difference in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. Now, as she looked out at the many faces in the crowd, faces of those whose lives had been touched by her actions, by the diner, by the foundation, she realized that the real reward had always been the ripple effect of compassion that had spread far beyond her. She was no longer just a waitress. She was part of a movement, a beacon of hope, a living reminder that even the smallest act of kindness could change the course of someone's life. And though the diner had become a symbol of transformation, Sarah knew that it wasn't the building, the food, or the money that mattered most. It was the connections, the stories, the human beings whose lives had been touched and uplifted, just as hers had been all those months ago. She thought of James, the man whose life had been restored by a simple meal, and of the countless others who had found a place of warmth and acceptance. She thought of Emma, who had believed in the vision from the start, and of the volunteers who had given their time and hearts to help others. She thought of the woman who had walked into the diner that afternoon, her son now thriving after finding kindness in the same place. For Sarah, the journey was not about fame or fortune. It was about the quiet power of human connection, the magic that happened when people chose to see each other, not as strangers or labels, but as fellow souls deserving of love and care. And as she walked off the stage, her heart full and her mind at peace, she whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." Because in the end, Sarah had learned what her grandfather had always told her: kindness given freely returns tenfold. And that truth had proven itself time and time again, creating a legacy that would continue to change lives long after the applause had faded. The diner, the foundation, and the countless lives changed. These were all just the beginning of something greater. A world where no one was ever alone, and where every act of kindness, no matter how small, had the power to transform the future. And that, Sarah realized, was the most beautiful story of all. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch and listen to this heartfelt story. We hope it inspired you as much as it inspired us. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can create ripples that change the world in ways we never expect. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales that remind us of the power of compassion and human connection. Your support means the world to us. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the story. Feel free to share them in the comments below. And remember, kindness always comes back when you least expect it. Until next time, take care and keep spreading positivity.